Well, good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is for you, wherever you are. This is, once again, your favorite speaker, Dr. Ronald Brown, and I'm going to be talking to you today about global warming. On the right, you see me at Jones Beach, which is just outside of New York City on Long Island. As you can see, it was winter when I was out there, so nobody was at the beach, but it had been after a very bad storm. And when the storms come up, they devastate the beach areas like along Fire Island, Coney Island, and Jones Beach and other places. So global warming is a reality. The only question that people bring up is it a natural occurrence? It's going to go on forever, always has gone on. Climates change, ice age, everything gets cold, and we have a heat wave like today and like now. But is it man-made? Are we accelerating it? Are we causing it to be worse? These are the issues which are being debated. Very heated political issue for politicians, right, left, middle, whatever. So the subtitle is humanity headed for extinction? We tend to forget that during the Ice Age, the population of the Earth declined because half of the planet was covered with ice. The animals were being killed off, and people had to flee to survive. Today, we have it the opposite. Heat wave, hurricanes coming in off of a warming ocean, killing people in Florida and along the East Coast, Mexico. Typhoons devastating countries like the Philippines and up into China. Forest fires. Is our planet going to get to the point where it is no longer habitable? And how are we going to survive? Will we survive? Will we go to the end like the dinosaurs did? Who knows? So this is our outline for today. The reality of global climate change. Nobody can argue that hurricanes are not worse than they were in the past. We're not more numerous. That the weather in New York is warming, while in the Southwest there is a drought. This is a reality. Then we'll go to a very interesting topic that is uniquely American. How do Americans view nature? Is nature, Mother Nature as we call it, is she our good friend and a nice mother? Or is she an evil witch? Is nature good or bad? Then we will go to the causes of global warming, the politics of global warming, the economics of global warming, and finally, global warming in New York City. And every city is being affected by global warming. So let's get started. Nobody can argue that global warming is not happening. Look at the map of the Arctic Sea ice in 1984, not all that long ago, and look at it today, or as it was in 2012. And today, it is even smaller. So gradually, the so-called North Pole will disappear. And the same thing is happening with the South Pole. As ice melts, snow melts, oceans open up, and who knows, maybe we'll be able to start building homes in the South Pole. The North Pole will disappear, it'll become a big ocean, which will open up all kinds of transportation possibilities to go from Japan to Europe. You won't have to go the whole way around the Southern Hemisphere. You could just go across the North Sea. So global warming is a reality. Picture skiing. I remember I lived in Switzerland for 7 years. Well, The areas, the resorts where I used to go skiing are no longer there because there is no ice. There are no glaciers, and the snow is almost non existent. So they're trying to reinvent themselves as hiking areas with little success. In the middle, we see the South Pole. More and more areas are losing their ice cover and rocks are appearing. And pretty soon we'll have not just rocks, but we'll have moss and maybe even some grass. And then somewhere down the road, people will start buying land and living there. Below that, we see the roses. My family, I grew up in north central Pennsylvania, right near the New York State border. Well, my mother always lamented that she couldn't raise roses. It was too far north. They would freeze in the winter. Well, we did everything we could to help her, but when the ground is frozen down a foot, nothing is going to survive in that area. But a couple years ago, when she was already 97 years old, for the very first time, a rose bush survived the winter. So even in small town Pennsylvania, weather is changing. Maple syrup. I remember as a kid going out tapping trees, collecting the sap. We would burn wood and boil up down and end up with lovely maple syrup. Well, that's no longer possible to do in Pennsylvania or New York, and even in Maine. So proud of its maple syrup. Global warming is changing the trees. And so the sugar maple, special type of maple tree, is no longer producing good quality sap. So now when you buy Maine maple syrup, chances are, if you look at the fine print, it is imported from Canada. Countries like Guatemala, which produce coffee beans, no longer is the weather conducive to coffee beans. And so our agriculture is changing. So there's no question that global warming is a reality. Hurricane Maria in 2017 devastated Puerto Rico. And then, of course, goes over Dominican Republic and Haiti and Cuba, and eventually hits the United States, where entire towns can be wiped off of the map. Water flooding in from the hurricane and storm surge flooding in from the ocean. Well, the FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency in Washington, D.C., is doing what it can to save the country, but it is having less and less success. How can a government agency in Washington stand up to a massive hurricane? In the Southwest, drought, extreme drought, covering most of California. Well, rivers dry up, lakes dry up. There's not enough water for agriculture. So you'd take out almond trees, which use a lot of water, and you plant something that uses less water. But as California gets drier and drier, and it's not just California, it's the entire Pacific coast into Texas and down into Mexico, where agriculture is failing. There is just not enough water. Sea levels are rising. Areas such as Shanghai, Bangkok, all of Bangladesh, huge areas of Indonesia and Malaysia will soon be underwater. I love the map in the upper right. This is, believe it or not, Florida. With global warming and the rising of the sea level, Key West, Miami, Cape Canaveral, St. Petersburg, Panama City, Jacksonville will be underwater. So if you want a seaside house for the future, Don't buy it on the coast because it will be an underwater house. Find out how far the water is going to move inland and buy a house there. So global temperatures are rising. There is no doubt about that. Scientists agree, and my mother would swear on a stack of Bibles, yes, the weather is changing even in Coudersport, Pennsylvania. This is a projected map of Jakarta, Indonesia. See a giant booming city? Well, with global warming and the rise of sea levels, half of the city is going to be underwater, and the other half is going to be swamps. So, what is Indonesia doing? It is building a brand new capital. Not sure which island they have chosen or where it's going to be, but they realize that defending this 32 million populated city from the oceans would cost more than it is worth. It is better to move these 32 million people to somewhere else and build a brand new city higher in elevation. Graphs of the surface temperature of the Earth from 1860 going up to 2000, and it is continuing to rise. Well, even 1 degree rise has catastrophic consequences for weather patterns, for the sea ice. And if 1 degree temperature Earth rise, well, water, as it warms, it expands. And so the oceans will automatically get higher. Fish from one area will have to migrate to another, or they will simply die. Coral off the shore is being destroyed along Australia and other places. Here we see temperature. Bright red area is record warmest, including New York. This is 2012. You can imagine what it is today. So the temperature is rising in the bulk of the country. So here again, this is a reality. As I'm speaking, the Mississippi Valley, where the great Mississippi River goes, the river is so low that the ships can hardly navigate. And that's important because most of the American food that we eat is produced in those bright red areas, and it goes down on ships to New Orleans, and there it is distributed around the world. And so this is a disaster. Wall Street Journal reported, human activity will determine pace of climate change. Here again, we may be in a natural warming cycle, but human activity, pollution, burning coal, gasoline, cutting down forests for agriculture, this is accelerating the pace of climate change. So there's no doubt that climate is changing. Nobody can argue. But the debate is it a natural cycle? We've had ice ages, seas have risen, seas have lowered. Or is it man-caused? Are we polluting the seas, the atmosphere with our use of coal and gasoline and factories? Or is it a combination? There is a natural cycle going on of the warming of the planet, but people are accelerating it. And so this is what the debate is in political, economic circles. What is causing it? And are we accelerating it, or are we causing it outright? Now, when we talk about global warming, Americans have a rather unique view of nature. According to the Bible in Genesis, Bereshit, first chapter, God said, "Let us make man in our image and likeness, and let man have dominion over the fish of the sea, the fowl of the air, over the cattle, and over all the earth, and every creeping thing that is on the earth." The important word here is dominion. We are the rulers. We are not part of nature. Nature was created and we were created separately. And we were given absolute control over nature. The word dominion also is related to dominate, to have domination over. And so it is a word of power and control. In Hebrew, the word is radah, dominion, reign, to prevail against, rule, supremacy, ascendancy, dominance, domination, superiority, authority, mastery, control, command, power, sway, rule, government, jurisdiction, sovereignty. Well, that means nature is dangerous. It is our enemy. If we don't keep it under control, it could kill us. Think of a wild animal. Well, we have to have dominion over wild animals or they will come and kill us. And so this is the biblical approach to nature. And a picture on the right, you see, God gave us the earth. It's ours as a possession. We have dominion over the plants, the animals, and the trees. Well, Ann Coulter wrote, God said, earth is yours. Take it. You can rape it. You own it. Do anything you want to it. So like the earth is in a way our slave. It is dangerous. It has to be kept under control. It has to be kept in chains. So that is the typically American adversarial relationship with nature. Think of the Puritans. When they arrived, well, they arrived in the fall of 1620 up in Plymouth Rock. Well, if it wasn't for the generosity of the Indians, nature would have killed them all off. The cold. No, snow covered all the earth so they couldn't dig for roots. Everything was gone. And so they would have starved to death. Nature was their enemy. But luckily, the Indians, Massasoit, took pity on them and gave them some food. Well, after that, the rest was history. Chopping down the trees, building dams, dominating the earth, manifest destiny, extend your domination from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific. And that's what we did, chopping down trees, making farms, domesticating animals, killing off the wild animals, damming rivers to make electricity, giant farms producing millions of turkeys and chickens and other meat for us, building bridges across the river, dominating the river, building ships, dominating the ocean, digging into the center of the earth for raw materials, coal, copper, iron, dominating the skies with our airplanes, dominating animals, crossbreeding them, domesticating them, and killing them off by the billions for our dinner table. So nature was an enemy. It was to be dominated. And we did that. We see American Progress by John Gast. America with the Declaration of Independence probably in one hand, walking across the continent. Well, the area where she has walked on the right has nice, beautiful, sunny skies. And she's being followed by railroads and stagecoaches and farmers. Well, ahead of her, you see the Indians and the buffalo being exterminated, even domination over nature. In front of her are dark clouds, but where she has walked is light. So this is dominating the continent, taming rivers, drilling tunnels through mountains, building bridges, digging deep into the earth for raw materials. Nature is the enemy. Have no pity on it. Cutting down the trees and making fields of corn, killing off the Native Americans, slaughtering the buffaloes by the millions. The people would be in the trains. Just for fun, they would shoot the buffalo, kill as many, and leave them to rot in the plains. Why was this sport to kill animals or to kill off the Indians to make way for American domination? Nature is the enemy. We have conquered diseases with penicillin. We have built dams for rivers. The Golden Gate Bridge, once again, linking two bits of land that nature had divided. AZT to kill off insects. Forest rangers protecting the forests for our use, but yet the forests were being chopped down. We go to hospitals to conquer diseases. As I speak, we are still in the last stages, hopefully, of the COVID-19. I got my monkeypox vaccine, conquering disease, germs. I can't even see these little germs circulating in my body, but I know they are my enemy and they should be exterminated. Well, sometimes nature fights back. In fact, that's a lot of people who are very much into nature argue that as we have exerted our dominion over nature, nature is fighting back. COVID-19, monkeypox. Well, we go into the jungles and chop down the trees to make farms, and the monkeys are killed off, and the people eat these wild animals. Well, their revenge is disease. Well, earthquakes. We dig wells, we dig caves and mines for coal. Well, earthquakes, many people would argue, is Mother Nature fighting back. Floods, we chop down all the forests of half of the United States and make them into farms where we're changing the weather patterns and there is less rain. And what's the result? The forest fires, hurricanes, floods, droughts, disease. This is, in a way, nature fighting back. Now, global warming, what are the causes? Here again, in the left, you see the extent of the Ice Age, which was about 20,000 years ago, pushing down, covering all of Canada, and then pushing down on the outskirts of New York City into parts of Northeast Pennsylvania, where I'm from, down even into the Mississippi Valley, covering cities of Chicago, New York, Boston. Well, this was, for one group of people, an advantage, because if you look at the map on the right, you see the red lines. Those are the routes that our Native Americans took when they went from Asia across Alaska, and they went through what scholars believe were certain openings in the ice and migrated down into what is United States and on into South America. They became the Native American Indians, the Aztecs, the Incas, and all of the other people of South America. So we do have natural cycles. And 20,000 years ago was not all that long ago. I mean, the earth was heavily populated by that time, and we went into a freezing time where the people from the north had to move further and further south, leading to wars. One tribe coming from the north, seeing a nice valley that was not covered by ice. Another tribe said, we were here first, it belongs to us. And you had the war. Well, same thing is happening today, where Central America and South America are being ravaged by drought and by earthquakes and global warming. Well, so you have millions of South Americans and Mexicans standing at Donald Trump's glorious wall. So we're having an invasion. So global warming has traditionally been caused major social and even military confrontations. Human-made air pollution, the millions of cars still burning gasoline are polluting the air. Factories in many countries still use coal or gasoline or oil and pump tons and tons of methane and carbon dioxide into the air. Look at the two graphs showing beginning in the 1700, going up, increasing radically by 1860s, 1900s, increasing today, filling the air with pollutants. And it's not just living in Los Angeles with all of its cars, or Chicago and Detroit with all of its factories, which cause the pollution. The pollution blows from one place to the other. As you can see, the wind carries it across the country. So you can live in a lovely suburb of Long Island, but you are still being affected by the pollution of the greater New York City area. China is doing a major effort to clean up its atmosphere, but when you have 1.5 billion people who need jobs, who need cars, who want air conditioning, you still have to rely on coal, gasoline, and oil for the majority of your energy. Electric cars are being built by Tesla and other groups, but still, China is the major consumer of coal. The United States and China produce the bulk of the world's air pollution. Well, we are damaging the planet. We are chopping down trees, making farms, and trees absorb the chemicals from the air and keep the air clean. But once these areas are turned into farms, you're using pesticides to poison the earth, to keep away insects. You're putting artificial fertilizers, which destroy the soil and wash into the rivers. We have mines going down into the earth, even exposed copper mines like you see on the lower right. Huge pits in the earth. And erosion, of course, is bad when you have a horrendous rainstorm. If there are no longer any trees to protect the land, you are going to end up with the good soil being washed into the rivers and the oceans and destroying agriculture. A term used is global footprint. So you see the picture of me. I'm sure you don't know where I'm at, but I'm in the middle of Brazil. This is the new capital of Brazil called Brasilia. So in New York, when it's cold in January and December, I go somewhere south. A couple of years ago, I was in Brazil. So I went to the new capital. Well, it was a huge forested area. Everything was chopped down, covered, a lot of green grass areas, but covered with buildings and highways and apartment buildings. Well, that was a wonderful vacation. But what was the global footprint of that? Well, I had to take the subway to the airport, flying to Mexico City, and then Mexico City to Rio, spending a wonderful vacation traveling around by bus, by train, by plane, eating in restaurants. So, what was the ecological footprint of this trip? Well, considering how much gasoline and oil was used for the airplane, the subways, transportation, air conditioning in the hostel, this vacation, month and a half vacation, severely added to global pollution. There would have been less pollution in the air and in the oceans and the land if I had stayed at home. But life goes on. I mean, as I'm talking to you today, tomorrow I'm leaving for Mexico for Thanksgiving for 11 days. Then I'll come back for a couple of weeks. And then in December, I'll leave for Barcelona. Then Christmas in Paris with my friends, and down to the Greek islands for a month, then back to Barcelona and back to New York. I leave a very big ecological footprint on the planet. Well, am I going to stop my vacations? No. I would like to cut back on my footprint, but life goes on. We can't shut down factories. Unemployment would soar. Shut down all the farms and return them to forests, people would starve. So the politics of globalization, of global warming is severe. Well, countries like United States, Western Europe, Russia got rich and powerful and industrialized by using coal and damming rivers and using pollution to fuel these factories. That's how we got rich. That's how the United States and Western Europe and Russia and Japan got their wealth, through industry. So we are responsible for the vast bulk of the pollution, which is already in the air and in the waters. Well, the industrializing countries, these would be India, Brazil, to an extent, China, Argentina, South Africa, the countries of in Indonesia and Mexico, which want to become wealthy, say, well, you polluted to become rich, so we should have the right to pollute to become rich. You are rich, so you should send us funds so that we don't have to use coal. You are responsible, you rich countries are responsible for the degradation of the planet. So you should pay the consequences by enabling Brazil and India and Indonesia to industrialize without adding further to the factory. So Indonesia says, all right, we want to build a factory to make automobiles. Well, you rich countries can pay for the research in technology so that it is non-polluting. So the rich countries said, no, we are rich, we polluted, and we're not, and we're just going to live our happy, rich lives. Whereas the industrializing countries saying, well, we want to industrialize, and if we industrialize like you did, we are surely going to destroy the planet. Well, in the United States, people like Al Gore are major advocates for reducing pollution. Well, the Republicans, on the other hand, say, well, jobs are important. We can't shut down a factory that uses coal. We have to use the coal, but gradually replace it with electricity, and electricity which is from solar or wind energy. Whereas people like Al Gore saying, we can't wait. We have to take care of this immediately. We are destroying our planet, and we are well on our way to destroying the human race. So in any election, global warming is a major topic. How far should the government go in purifying the air? How fast they should move, how radical should be their solutions is the major issue. Well, evangelical Christians who support Donald Trump and the Republican right have a different attitude towards global warming. They say, well, it's one of the signs of the end times. The Bible clearly states in the end times, there will be wars, there will be famines, there will be false gods and false prophets. But in the end, the Messiah will return. And of course, the Messiah, according to Christians, is going to be Jesus. Tim Lay and Jerry Jenkins had this magnificent series of novels called Left Behind, where they chronicle the end of the world and the second coming of Jesus. Even in Islam, there's an idea of a Messiah who will come and make everything right. And so religion comes into play in all of this. Is global warming a problem that humans can solve? Or should we just live with it and wait peacefully for a Messiah to pop out of a cloud or raise from his tomb and save humanity? Should we get involved in solving the problems of the world, especially global warming, or will God come and save us? Well, the Kyoto Protocol of 1997 was signed by President Clinton, committing the United States and the major countries of the world to reduce emissions of carbon dioxide, which are generated mostly by electricity generating plants, coal, and steel plants. The developed countries, the rich countries, were going to make major efforts to help the poor countries, the developing countries, accomplish this. Well, it was signed by President Clinton, which was good. It was accepted by most of the countries of the world, which was good. But Congress said no. It would lead to the closing of plants, to the reduction of agriculture. It would lead to unemployment. It would lead to an economic decline in the United States. So Congress said, we can't do this. And of course, George W. Bush opposed it viciously, saying, we are a rich and a powerful country. We have the right to live in wealth and luxury, and let the poor and developing countries die of hunger and global warming. The United States is rich enough, we can build a wall to protect New York from the rising sea level. We can put out the forest fires. We can build a wall to keep out economic refugees and pollution refugees fleeing across the border with Texas. And so this protocol, which is still on the books, but which was rejected by Congress, was an attempt to confront the pollution from carbon dioxide, especially, which was coming from our electricity, coal, and steel plants. The Paris Climate Agreement of 2016 again said that the humans have to hold the increase of global temperature to below 2%, 2 degrees Celsius from pre-industrial period. We should foster climate resilience and low greenhouse gas emissions, but that does not threaten food production. Again, the economics comes in. And we should make finance flows consistent with a pathway towards low greenhouse gas emissions, meaning finance in poor countries and developing countries ways to help them industrialize and become well-to-do, if not rich, without radically adding to the pollution situation as it is today. So both of these were attempts, they were visions of doing something to halt global warming. In fact, there is a big conference going on as I speak in the Middle East, where the leaders of the world are there trying to once again get the countries to cooperate, bear the burden of slower economic development, but yet improve the situation for the climate and the planet. Well, the United States accepted the Paris Agreement under Obama. Well, that was 2016. Well, the very next year, Donald Trump was elected, and he said, I'm not a big believer in global warming. Well, you have to be blind not to see global warming, but what he should have said, I am not a believer in the fact that humans contribute to global warming and that something can be done about it. Of course, he's a politician. He needs votes. And unemployed steel workers do not vote for the president who shuts down their factory. The graph in the center, it shows global carbon dioxide emissions by country. China, 30%, and the United States, 14%, the European Union, about 10%, and then you see India, Russia, Japan, and others, 31, almost 32% are by the poor countries of the world who desperately need jobs for their booming population. Africa, the fastest growing population on the face of the earth, huge increases in medical care, more and more babies survive, and older people live longer. Well, they need food, they need jobs, they need clothing. And so they are going to industrialize and do what they have to increase the wealth of their populations. Well, the economics of global warming is crucial. Republicans argue we cannot take major drastic steps to stop global warming because it will impact the economy. Walmart needs cheap products produced in slave labor camps around the poor countries of the world, such as Guatemala, Pakistan. We Americans outsource jobs. It's cheaper to have a factory in Pakistan make our blue jeans or our Adidas sneakers, our laptops, our expensive Louis Vuitton bags. It's cheaper to make them in a poor country. factories which pollute the air, the land, and the water. But what do Americans want? If we produced Levi Strauss jeans in the United States, they'd cost probably $200 a pair. But if we have them produced in a country like Bangladesh, which has very little control over pollution, the price would go down to $20. That's why everything we have, jeans, shoes, clothing, laptops, furniture, bags, are produced in poor countries, which are polluting the air, the water, and the land with almost no limitations. Why? Because it's good for the rich countries. We don't want to spend $200 for a pair of Adidas when they can be produced in Guatemala for almost nothing. So the industries, the big titans of Wall Street, are in a war against the ecologists. The ecologists say, don't chop down the forests of Brazil to produce cheaper and more food. Keep the forests up. Whereas the industrialists, the agribusiness said, chop down the forest, produce even more food and more meat and more corn and potatoes, and the price will go down. So industries are interested in their profit. If they're listed on Wall Street, every year they have to show that the company made a profit. If it didn't make a profit, well, then it would lose its investors. Whereas the ecologists saying we have to produce, but we should do it without destroying the planet. Long-term versus new pollutants, a major issue. What is happening with the countries today? Well, we see China up 10%. China is increasing its pollution of the air and the water, as is India, Japan, Iran, Canada. Other countries which are increasing pollution are South Africa, South Korea, and Russia. The United States and Germany are the only two countries which have made major and significant decreases in pollution. Still, the United States is the second largest polluter, but especially on the Democratic side of the political spectrum, major steps are being made. Insulating houses better so they don't use so much electricity to heat during the winter or to cool during the summer. Increase in the use of electric cars, making a major impact. Shutting down coal mines, wind farms, using water to produce electricity. So the situation is very mixed. The two countries, Germany and probably the rest of Western Europe, along with the United States, are making major efforts. But in the United States, as we have seen, it depends very much on who's in the White House. If you had Obama or Biden, who are very concerned about pollution and global warming, you had one program. Then you would have the Republicans, and especially Donald Trump, who would argue that jobs come first and that we should continue pollution because we don't want to harm the industries. So how is climate change going to affect New York City? That's where I live. Well, we see the New York 2140 picture. Well, we see all of Lower Manhattan underwater. But if you look closely, you'll see in the distance a whole new cluster of skyscrapers. Well, New York realizes that it's going to have to do something. Picture on the left is another vision of New York City completely flooded because of the rising sea levels. Cartoon on the right shows the Statue of Liberty being swallowed up. Well, I don't think the oceans are ever going to get that high, but climate change is drastically affecting New York City. What can a city, which is right on the Atlantic Ocean with rivers going up, the Hudson River, the East River, the Harlem River, a city of islands. We tend to forget that New York is a city of islands: Staten Island, Manhattan Island, Long Island, Roosevelt Island, Governor's Island. These are all islands. The only part of New York City which is on the mainland is the Bronx. So if New York is going to survive, it's going to have to take a major step. The book in the middle, New York 2140, shows that New York is simply going to move inland, abandon most of Manhattan, and move up into the Bronx and Westchester County, where it will build a brand new city. That's one approach. Can't resist ocean rising. You're going to build barriers that go higher and higher, but eventually a hurricane is going to come and destroy the city. Well, New York has a history of confronting disasters. For example, the great yellow fever epidemic of 1690, when the United States was still a British colony. Well, New York City had a population of 6,000. 150 people died. Well, people gradually realized that diseases such as yellow fever, cholera, were caused by mosquitoes, stagnant water, ponds in your backyard to raise fish, swampy areas, collected water, such as the Lower East Side. That's why it's called the Lower East Side of Manhattan, not because there's also an Upper East Side, but the Lower East Side because it was low-lying and swampy. Everybody's house back in the colonial period was filled with standing water, which was heaven for the mosquitoes, which caused malaria and other diseases. That's why New York City eventually said, we have to do something. So they built the canal to drain the swamps of Manhattan. Today we have Canal Street. Well, there's no canal there, but at one time there was a big ditch, one leading to the Hudson River, the other to the East River, to drain the swampy areas of the Lower East Side. So gradually, when New York would be confronted with some new disaster, New York City generally responded pretty well. Hurricane Sandy in 2012 was a warning. See the hurricane, the picture on the right, crossing Manhattan, flooding huge areas of Staten Island, Fire Island, Long Island, Brooklyn, Queens, and even going up the Hudson River with tons of rain. Well, this was one of the worst disasters of New York City, and it made the city very aware that climate was changing. Hurricanes were getting stronger and coming further north with more intensity. The oceans were rising, and so when there would be a huge storm surge, tons of salt water would flood into the city, destroying the subway electric cables, destroying underground water systems. So New York realized that global warming was about to destroy the city. Well, it was argued by many people that Hurricane Sandy was a self-inflicted calamity, meaning it wasn't just a natural global warming happening by nature on its own, but people were contributing to it. Well, New York was very aware of that because if you look at the map on the right, you see New York as it was under the Dutch. That little piece of paper, you see that line going across it at the top, that was Wall Street. Everything below Wall Street, that was the Dutch town of New Amsterdam. Well, it is placed over what is Manhattan today. And if you follow Wall Street down into on the right-hand side, you see it continues. There is Wall Street continuing down to the East River. Well, everything outside of the paper map is landfill. This was dirt dumped into the rivers and into the harbor to double the size of Lower Manhattan. In fact, the World Trade Center was built on mud, which had been dumped into the Hudson River. Well, according to Discover magazine, it was this expansion of Manhattan, as well as Bronx, Staten Island, Queens, that was responsible for much of the damage of Hurricane Sandy. The city was expanded into the rivers. They were low-lying, built on mud. So when a hurricane hit the city, there was really no place for the water to go. The rivers couldn't handle all of this water. And so the way we build cities, and especially New York City, right on the water, low-lying, and expanding the island, made hurricanes even worse. There was less room for the water to go. The land was unstable. Huge tunnels for subways and highways underground, all of which were flooded. Sandy was only a Category 1 hurricane, meaning 100 miles an hour maximum, which is not so terrible. But there was a 32-foot wave of salt water which flooded the city. Well, rain is good for trees and plants and yards and flowers, but salt water, as it covered the city, was a disaster. It went into people's homes, into their basements. It destroyed the electrical system of homes, of the subways. It ruined telephone cables, which in Manhattan are all underground. It flooded the water system. It flooded basements of homes. A friend of mine who lives in Brooklyn, when this water flooded her house, all of her books, her computers, all of her winter her fur coats and clothing were all stored in closets in the basement. Well, they were all saturated with not just salt water from the ocean, but chemicals washed in from around the city. She had to throw everything out. Of course, she had no insurance. Her yard was saturated with salt water. The grass, the plants, everything died. So she had to either cover her yard with cement and forget about it, or pay some $30,000 to have her yard dug out, all the earth removed, and new earth brought in from upstate New York to rebuild her yard. An estimated $19 billion in damage from the rain, from the hurricane, and the giant wave of ocean water which flooded the city. These are some pictures of the hurricane. You see apartment buildings. Well, the basement where they had all of the electrical equipment, the air conditioning, the heating, the hot water systems were all destroyed. Subways were flooded. Homes, everything was flooded with salt water. Picture in the bottom on the left shows some of the communities along Fire Island. Once again, everything swamped with ocean salt water. Well, New York had never suffered such a horrendous catastrophe. Look at the Statue of Liberty. That was 12:12 p.m. My God, it looks like it's almost going to be knocked over. Fire Island, picture in the upper right. The ocean in the storm was so strong, it just washed through the island, creating two islands. Picture below shows the streets of lower Manhattan being swamped with water. I often wonder who took that picture. It looks like something from a science fiction movie. The picture in the upper left, that is the subway station at Broadway, the bottom of Broadway where Bowling Green is. Looks like it's an entrance to a swimming pool. People never realized that parking lots, such as the one for taxis, all of these taxis were ruined because the electronics, the radios, the global positioning devices, everything is electric. And so the salt water completely destroyed the electronics. They couldn't be cleaned. Streets were flooded. Parking garages. How many parking garages are under buildings? Well, I guess this was a good time for your car salesman that the price of new cars went through the ceiling because these cars could not be repaired. All of their electronics were saturated with salt water and oil and other chemicals. The storm surge, which is ocean water making a giant wave and swamping the East Coast, going from Connecticut the whole way down to Delaware, showing the area that was most affected. Again, this is salt water and picking up oil and chemicals, picking up garbage. And this, when the water finally went away, everything was soaked in salt and chemicals and garbage. And so it was impossible to repair hot water systems in buildings, heating, air conditioning units, which were either on the first floor or in the basement. All of the automobiles had to be junked. So the storm surge, this wall of salt water, is even more destructive than the hurricane itself. The New York City Housing Authority responded as much as they could. For example, they started building storm gates, which they could close and isolate the basement from the incoming water. Flood walls around boiler systems, subway systems, elevator units, all of which have their electrical system in the basement. Well, the New York City Housing Authority, which provides housing for poor people, is a major business institution in New York. 500,000 New Yorkers live in public housing. And other hundreds of thousands receive rental assistance under programs like Section 8. And a lot of these are poor people who live in rather poor sections. And very often, when the house was flooded, they had no insurance, and they would very often lose everything in their house, and they had no insurance or any way of recouping the damage, which makes storm surge and hurricanes even more devastating to New York with its massive number of poor people. And the vast majority of these people living in the city, like myself, we don't have a car. So if there is a hurricane coming, I'm going to be hesitant to go down into the subway, which could be flooded at any minute. The buses are going to be filled with people. So we can't evacuate New York City effectively on short notice. Well, there are various proposals to make the city a bit more resistant. One of these is the East River Coastal Resilience Project. All around Manhattan, lower Manhattan, they plan to build an elevated park. So you could cross the highway, go up some stairs, and you would be on a nice park, which would be higher than the surrounding area, sort of a green wall surrounding lower Manhattan, the heavily populated areas, and the area most exposed to the storm surge and the hurricane water. Here again, this is a project. But once again, it's going to cost billions of dollars to build it. You're going to have people who are going to oppose it for a variety of reasons. It's going to become political, economic. Who knows if it will ever be built. Another project is to build a storm surge barrier. This would go, as you can see, down to New Jersey and up to New York, which would be a giant gate, so that when the storm would come, the red line would be a raised wall made like a park, and the dotted surge barrier would be a giant gate which can open, such as the one in the picture on the right. So when everything is okay, it would be open, the ships and boats could go in and out. But whenever there would be a storm, it would close. And so it would keep the storm surge down to a minimum. But again, $7 billion. Just read today in the newspaper that the city, as well as the country, were probably on the verge of financial bankruptcy. Now, two places which have already done this and it's proved effective are Holland, which is low-lying, in fact, under the sea level, and Venice. One is a giant gate, such as the one we see on the left, which opens and closes depending upon need. Another one is something that you don't see, but it's under the water. And when a storm comes, it rises and it blocks the rising sea from coming in. So these are two areas of the world which have confronted the challenge of the sea rise. In Queens, where I live, they're building little mini gardens. They call them street gardens. The one in the upper left, that's right outside of my apartment. And it's my job to go out and to weed it and to keep it going. But it absorbs a lot of rainwater. Whereas the sidewalks are cement, the streets are cement, the houses are cement, this opens up more areas so that the land can absorb more water. Another project is restoring wetlands. These are swampy areas which surround most of the city areas. Picture on the right shows Brooklyn in the bottom left-hand corner. That whole area is a swampy area. In New Jersey, huge areas of swamps. And even in Queens, up at Flushing Meadows area, it's a big swampy area. Well, traditionally, New York has just filled them in with dirt and built housing and apartment buildings on these swampy areas. Well, historically, these areas have absorbed lots of rainwater, and they are a mixture of salt water and fresh water. And the plants that live there live well in both salt and fresh water. But once we cover them over with cement and build buildings and parking lots and shopping malls, well, then the water does not soak in. The storm surge washes over the parking lot and it goes further inland and ruining people's homes and entire neighborhoods. So there is an effort to restore the wetlands, even buying out people who live in this area, tearing down their houses, digging up their parking areas, and return them to nature so that the open ground can absorb more of the water. Many homes are being raised. The average is 8 feet. The one on the right is a little house I used to visit when on Fire Island. Another one on the left is one located in Queens. Now, you're not allowed to build anything on the ground level. You can use it for parking. You can have a grill there or something, but you can't have walls, which means you can't have an elevator. So imagine if you were 80 years old and you had a beautiful house and you didn't want to give it up, but it was right on the water. And so you agreed to have it raised. And very often the government would give you money to do this. But then look at all those steps to go up and in the front door. The steps are made of wood, so that if there is a storm, they would probably be washed away because it's not a permanent institution. So just hope you're not isolated in your house and have the steps washed away and you're 80 years old. Well, other problems. Are we ready? Tunnels, subways are being swamped. And as oceans rise, more areas in New York are being subjected to storm surge. And of course, the more water which is left lying around the city, because it can't soak into the ground since everything is covered with cement, you have a rise in mosquito population. Imagine when the subway was underwater for so many days. This was a paradise for mosquitoes. And of course, mosquitoes bring malaria. So, are we going to be ready for the next hurricane? Well, wait and see. Hollywood has really done a lot to make people aware of global warming and everything associated with that. The Day After Tomorrow showed not global warming, but a new ice age, which is also a possibility, natural cycles. Before the flood, the 11th hour, making people aware of what could happen. I mean, I have a store of canned goods in my apartment, so that if there should be another disaster, I could probably stay in my apartment for a month and never have to go out. Now, that doesn't mean I'll have electricity or gas so that I can cook something, but you can always eat a can of Spam and baked beans, even if it is not heated. So global warming is a reality. We can argue about if it's human caused or if it is a natural cycle, but it is a reality. These pictures are of the hotel where I stay on Fire Island. Well, it was built a long time ago, and it is very low lying. It's a big wooden hotel, and it would be almost impossible to raise 8 feet above it. But The room I stay in was flooded during the last hurricane. They had to take out the floor, take down the walls, all the furniture was destroyed. They had to redo the electricity to get my room ready. But Fire Island is exposed to the ocean. Every time there is a storm, it ravages these little houses lying along the beach. They're planting more dune grass to stabilize the area, but still you can see how exposed this is. Same thing with Manhattan, Queens, Brooklyn, Staten Island. We are facing the ocean. And this is going to be one of the major challenges, not only facing New York, but Miami, Washington, D.C., Los Angeles, San Francisco, to say nothing of Dhaka in Bangladesh, Shanghai in China, Rio de Janeiro in South America. I mean, cities like Mexico City, where I'm going to be tomorrow, is in the mountains, which is lucky. But still, the hurricanes and storms very often still have a lot of power by the time they ravage the coast and move inland. So global warming is a reality. The question is, how are we going to deal with it? So thank you very much for joining me. This is Ron Brown. I can be contacted at ronbrownmedia@gmail.com. If you have comments or questions or anything, I'd love to hear from you. Have a wonderful day and stock up on all you need for the next hurricane and storm surge. Thank you for joining me. Bye-bye.